Well, thank you all for joining. Welcome to the August edition of Lakeside Chats. I'm Erin Hargrove. For those of you that have been on these before, we'll get into introducing my co-host here for today's session. But I wanted to just kick off with the idea of the why a little bit around the topic for today. So today's topic for Lakeside Chat is lonely in leadership. And this topic really came from an event that Bethany and I were a part of in April with a group of small business owners where there was a table discussion around lonely at the top, which is, I used a different languaging here, but essentially a very similar conversation. And what we're recognizing is this is a topic that, one, we've got really high attendance and really high engagement on the topic in and of itself. But two, it's one of those topics where we all know it's happening, but nobody talks about it. And so we wanted to make sure that we were bringing some storytelling around the topic. And so you'll hear both Bethany and I come together today talking a little bit about the stories that we have behind the topic. But we want to get to know you guys too and hear your voice throughout the conversation along the way. So thank you for being here. Welcome to Lakeside Chats. As I said, I'm Erin Hargrove. I'm Director of Business Development here at Lakeside HR Group, hence the Lakeside and Lakeside Chats. I am joined today, and I'm really excited to introduce to you Bethany. I told her on the front end that I hate when people do my intros of the long wheelie spiely thing. So I'm going to let her introduce herself, and she can decide how much wheelie spiely she wants to provide to.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, no spiels. Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here today. It's been so fun to work with Erin on this topic. And as she mentioned, we both have some personal experience with this topic. So we're going to go into that today. I am here I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am originally from Minnesota. I left Minnesota in my early 20s and moved out to East Africa. And Erin knows this a little bit, but I came into this space, this conversation, because of my experience working in East Africa, in Sudan. I was working in peaceful conflict resolution in small remote areas where there are returning refugee communities coming back to their home, for the first time in decades. And I was taught this incredible modality for conflict resolution, which was about creating space for people to experiment with I started to follow that idea, and then I got contacted by an HR manager in Sudan, and she said, we're having conflicts in our office. Can you come into our offices and work with our staff on the conflicts here? I said, yes. I started to get exposed to how important the HR function is in organizations for engaging, retaining, keeping really incredible people in the organization, keeping them focused on the important work at hand. And that was it for me. The rest is history, truly. I moved to Washington, D.C. I got my master's in human resource management. I spent 10 years in D.C., couple in Boston, and then went back to East Africa during the pandemic. What we're going to focus on today is while I had the opportunity to have to serve in leadership as the chief people officer at an international development agency in Washington, D.C., and what that experience was like for me. That's going to inform a lot of our conversation today. I moved back to Minnesota, true story. I moved back to Minnesota because of loneliness. So I'm back in Minnesota. I had been all over the world, and I needed to be back near my people, my family, my roots. And so there's a lot of layers to this conversation that I'm excited to dive into today.
Well, and I want to just sort of also just give a quick plug to where you work today. So do you want to just quickly talk about the Bailey Group, just so we don't lose sight of the Bailey Group in the process as well?
Thank you. Yeah, I work at the Bailey Group. That's, Minneapolis-based company. I got to know them when I moved back here. Yeah, thanks for that, Erin. So the Bailey Group does executive coaching and consulting. And when I met with them, it's a group of people with a lot of aligned values, wanting to make sure that the world of work is human and effective in all of the ways that we show up in our leadership, and in the way that we lead our organizations and our people. So there's a couple of people on the call today that might be from the Bailey Group, so shout out to them, and thanks for making sure I name that. Thanks, Erin.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure. She has a big title, and with that big title comes a lot of and. We made sure the ampersand got added so we didn't lose part of the title to make sure that the Bailey Group was well represented here today.
Mhm.
Like I said, we've got like over almost 50 of you people on, and it's so great for you to be here. But I want to just do a level set. I know many of you are repeat offenders. You've been on a Lakeside Chat in the past, and some of you are brand new. So just to kick off, my goal with Lakeside Chats, or when I started Lakeside Chats in January, was I wanted to provide what I refer to as an underproduced webinar series, an opportunity for a conversation to get started. And so with that, I want to just run through what I would say are my Lakeside Chat rules of engagement, just to level set with everyone in terms of what to expect today. So first, you'll notice, if you haven't already, that this is a recorded session. So these sessions will be recorded. We are going to, once they are done, we'll get it edited and added to the website for people to download and view if they missed it. Like I said, I had a couple people already email me this morning, bummed that they weren't able to be in the live format, but we're anxious to hear the conversation to unfold as a follow-up. So just so you know, it will be available for future viewing. The access to that recording, as well as the deck, Bethany and I are going to reference a couple of different articles along the way that we've read, or as we've sort of gotten ourselves familiar with the topic from an outsider point of view. Those will be provided in the follow-up material as well. But I want to make sure that you guys, as the now 50 attendees on, are participating to the degree that it makes sense for you as well. And when I say that, what I mean is I want to make sure that you use and leverage the Teams features as much as possible. There'll be some times, probably very soon, that I'm going to throw it out to you guys from a chat perspective. Bethany and I will talk, but I really want you guys to engage in terms of what your relationship is to this particular topic, in terms of how it's helped. We 100% recognize that, you see the fifth bullet there, there is no right answer here when it comes to loneliness and leadership. There are a lot of options and what's right for you, and we recognize that that's okay. And this is an opportunity really for information sharing and conversation starting. So I've been really, I'll be honest, my most favorite thing in the whole wide world is when my worlds collide. And I've had a couple moments as a result of Lakeside Chats where I've noticed people on the chat have met and introduced themselves to new people and gotten and shared best practices amongst each other in a way that they maybe potentially wouldn't have in any other format. And so use the chat, raise your hand. At some point, I might even ask you to go off mute. Your voice can be added to the conversation as well. Bethany, encourage you to encourage them to, if there's something you want to hear from somebody in particular, that's the goal today. We want to make sure that you guys are a part of the conversation as much as possible. So again, thank you for being here. And with that, in a way to get you immediately engaged in today's conversation, we recognize that this isn't a compliance topic like last month. This isn't a, listen to founder stories like we did in March. This is a topic that's really near and dear to everyone's heart, and everyone has a personal relationship with the concept of loneliness and or leadership and the relationship of the two together. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind sharing, when you heard the topic for today's Lakeside Chat, what was the thing that drew you to a topic on leadership and loneliness? And as I wait for the chat to unfold, and Marie, thank you for your note here. Bethany, I'm going to tell you where my piece of this puzzle is, in terms of where, again, part of it, like I said, was being in a room where I recognized that small business leaders in general gravitated to this particular topic. Being in a place where they recognize the relationship to who can I say what to when is something that I don't think I had an immediate appreciation for until I got on a leadership team in a small business. And I watched how you live in a space where you have to stay positive and optimistic and sometimes protect the team that you're on, to make sure that they're not scared by, some of the big numbers or some of the goals that we have behind the scenes. And it's a different relationship, and it's a different animal when you sit in a leadership role. Bethany, I'm going to follow along with chat, but I'd like to hear your, I know we've talked about this a little bit. I know you just alluded to your transition to even back to Minnesota, but what else would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I would just echo what you said. As an HR professional, which we both have been, and are, we often have information, right? We have information that can't be shared with everybody as transparently as we maybe want. And I think every leader I know, working with the clients that I work with, it doesn't matter what position you're in or what business operational unit you're in, leaders have insight and knowledge that they can't always transparently share, and that can become really lonely really fast. The other layer I want to add into it is power dynamics, right? When we become leaders, we suddenly have positional power that we didn't the day before the promotion. And positional power does play a role in a dynamic in our relationships with our direct reports, our peers, our other leaders. And so, yeah, in addition to the communication on what can we share, how do we share information, when do we share it, that can be really confusing and isolating, but also the positional power can change the relationship with the people that we might have been really close with before we were in that position. And so another layer to that we can unpack.
Yeah. Well, and we're seeing in the chat, I mean, I genuinely appreciate you guys all jumping in here. This concept of a leader of one or a team of one is such an interesting component. And we're seeing that as I'm seeing it and reading through the trends here. It's kind of an ongoing trend that we're seeing in some of the comments here is people being a team of one, being on an HR team of one. You live in a space where all of a sudden you have information and content and you need an outlet. And I think that loneliness is a part of that, that solidarity or, mono work arrangement that you have to live in. Thank you for those of you that shared that. I think, Travis, thank you for noting the fact that this is a topic that needs to be discussed and it doesn't get as much conversation. I think this is really good. And I think the idea of understanding the perspectives of leadership too, I think I even saw a couple more of on the individual contributor side, noting just getting understand that perspective, right? Being in a place where you, like I said, I don't think I worked for a big company for many years and you don't always see, you kind of assume that they are, they are the all-knowing, right? They kind of are Wizard of Oz feature. They have it all. Yep, they know what everybody leadership has every answer, and they don't have a lot of the answers, and that loneliness comes in that space as well. So thank you all for participating. So let's talk about the problem, because I think that's what it is, right? The concept of feeling lonely in leadership is what I would argue is a problem and something that, again, is looking for some element of a solution. And we talked about this already, of the who can you trust, right? The element of trust in terms of who's your circle, who can you tell stuff to, how much can you tell them to, and then allies. And Bethany, as we were prepping for this, you had a really good story around the ally piece of it and building that leadership team allyship. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And please keep chatting. The insights you're providing are so helpful. And so, yeah, so my personal experience with this is I went from an individual contributor, so I can totally relate to a team of one in an HR shop, individual contributor. And then I started leading a couple of team members, and then I was promoted into the chief people officer role. So my peers as co-senior directors and things like that became it was a different relationship pretty quickly there, where I came in at the director level in this organization, and I worked really hard to build trust. So connecting with other directors. And there's a couple layers to this, and I'm just going to be fully transparent. Those of you who know me know that that's how I show up. So what was interesting is at the time there was a very low level of trust with the executive leadership team when I first joined the organization. So before I was chief people officer, I come in as a director, I got to make a lot of friends and allies, and there was this really easy bonding point, which was executive leadership, what's wrong with them? And I was kind of with people, and I worked really hard to manage up and do all of the things to try to influence up. When I ended up the chief people officer, I couldn't point to anyone above me anymore. I couldn't blame anybody for what was going on. It was in my hands to take ownership and accountability for everything that was happening in our HR team. And my relationships with all of those other directors, senior directors, changed, where there was this new level of scrutiny. There was this new level of questions like, how much is Bethany going to change now that she's on that executive leadership team? So I had that dynamic happening. What was also happening is on the executive leadership team, there was a lot of trust issues amongst the leadership team themselves. And so I had to work really hard to show that I was now coming in the best faith, kind of best foot forward to be truly a part of them, not an antagonist, not someone who is going to go against them, not someone who's going to work against them. And there was a lot going on in the organization. And I learned it's really true that there was a lot of kind of back channel conversations happening outside of the executive team leadership team meetings that we had. And I learned I had to work really hard outside of our kind of public forum, so to speak, to build individual relationships with those executive team leaders. And I just had to learn what our bonding moments could be. And it took so much time to get there. I did get there. And there's a lot we can unpack around that. That's kind of like, there's a political savvy element to it. There's a trusting is a choice, right? I had gone from seeing them, quote unquote, them as the problem to suddenly being a part of that team. And I had a lot to learn through that process as well, right? So at the end of it,
let's
go ahead,
pause
Erin,
for just a hot second on that. I want to just restate that piece of it, because I think that that's a really powerful element. And I'm guessing many of you that are on today have been in that place, right? You start out as a contributor and get promoted into a role of leadership. And the element, I feel like it happens quite a bit. And it's one of those areas when you think about manager training and you think about leadership training, it's a bit of an understated element of how do you make that transition out of being one of the people to being the leader of the people, right? In any way, shape, or form, whether it's the true people leader, or, in any element of moving up. And I think that there's a lot of power in that particular statement. So I just wanted to pause and restate that piece of it, because I think that that is not something that leadership training or manager training in theory is set up for, setting up new leaders, especially, to be in a place to understand what that transition point will look like.
Yeah, thank you for drilling in on that, Erin. I would love to hear in the chat how you all have navigated that transition in your career. And I think that one of the things that there was kind of two things I had to do really quickly. One is just listen. Of course, I had ideas. Of course, I had perspective as someone who was kind of in the mix. I was not new to the organization. I was just new to the team, new to the position. But to go in and go, hey, you tell me what's going on up here, what's happening in your worlds, how can I be a partner to you? And to truly listen, not pretend to listen, but really listen to the complexity of their teams, of their worlds. And they may not have been very forthright, right, at the outset about all of their challenges. I needed to kind of build their trust and show that I was going to be trustworthy of, like Erin mentioned earlier, the information they were sharing with me about their position. They were lonely. That's what I found out. They were lonely. Right? So they had this kind of isolation that they were sitting in and going, I've got these problems. I don't know who I can trust. I don't know where my allies are. And suddenly I realized I have a choice here to become an ally if I want to, right? And instead of someone that they're working against, someone that they're working with. And Erin and I don't know if you want to get into kind of some of the HR world that we've talked about, but yeah, I'll follow your lead.
Because I think we're going to get into some of the solve piece of it as we get deeper. But quick fact check. So again, throwing it out to the group of people here. What percentage do you think of CEOs will admit, and that's sort of the operative word here, admit to feeling lonely? A, under 25%, B, 25 to 50, C, 50 to 75, or D, over 75? I'm loving to see. We already have we have three of everyone's answering. This is great. I was expecting that, just like any ACT test, everyone's just going to press C, but just kidding. Perfect. All right. Well, are you guys ready for the big reveal? All right. So the answer is this is based on a Harvard business publishing article that came out at the end of 2023. So 4 in 10 workers experience loneliness at work. And though leaders report 2 times that. So we are at a point where that's 80% of leaders are noting some element of loneliness at work, as opposed to 40% of their more junior level people. I'll be honest, I was a bit blown away by an 80%. I was of many of you that put the B's and the A's. I would think there was more of a which is funny, having made the transition myself, that I would have thought more people would have, puffed their chest out and felt like they had it. But I think it's a fair statement to recognize that this element is widespread, is noticed, and leaders aren't afraid to admit it once asked, right? The idea of those pieces of it is a really poignant component to the topic, and I think probably why we had 80 people register, right? It's a topic where people feel it. People don't get asked if they're lonely, and once asked, it's well recognized. Thank you all for participating. Another one for you guys, as we think about the problem and we start to think about how do we sort of get closer to the solutioning of it all, I want to ask you guys on the chat, what do you think is the cause of loneliness? So we know it's a problem. We know that people feel it. We know that 80% of leaders are feeling it and 40% of workers are feeling it. What do you think is the cause of it? And again, I'm going to go back to our prep call, Bethany, in terms of us having this. I'm going to go the deep conversation you and I had about the conversation. It's interesting that we're seeing articles on loneliness and leadership coming out after 2022. But if you really do a lot of digging, there's not a lot of articles on this topic prior to 2022. And if we think about things like, everything points back to some element of the pandemic. It's not to say that people didn't feel it pre-pandemic. It's not what I'm saying in any way, shape, or form. But I think we had a big discussion in 21 and 22 around the concept of burnout. Burnout became quite obvious as we were having big conversations about burnout. People recognized what burnout felt like. They had the feelings around it. And so we tried to solve for burnout. And I think what we came up with as we started to understand burnout, was we started to recognize that one of the major causes for burnout was more upstream than that. And that comes from this vein of loneliness. Bethany, what would you add?
Yeah, exactly. I think I can all speak from my own experience. I am an introvert. And so being, actually physically isolated in my home for a bit of the pandemic, I was like, oof, like this feels good. I've got all this time and space for myself. The work was really busy, but I just had a totally different way of living as the whole world did as well. And what was really interesting is I realized that I wasn't, like a lot of you were saying in the chat, I wasn't celebrating wins with anybody. When there were hard days, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to talk to. After I was a chief people officer, I started working for myself before I joined the Bailey Group. And Erin and I talked about being not only individual contributors, but then solo entrepreneurs. And, you've got to do it all. You're your HR person, you're your admin person, you're your finance, and then you're also your own buddy on celebrating the wins and dealing with the hard days. So for me, it was like I leaned in too much to my introversion, and I overly embraced that to the point of going, oh, I've got to overcorrect in a big way. I've got to go find where people are in my life. And here I am in Minnesota. And so as far as the cause for me, it's almost this kind of like, it's vulnerable to admit that I felt lonely. A couple of you have put in the chat that you don't want to admit that you need other people, or you don't want to admit that you don't have all the answers. As leaders, we're quote unquote supposed to have all the answers. That's a perception. And we buy into it, and our teams buy into it, our colleagues might buy into it, and all of a sudden we're trying to figure out what the next step is, but we're isolated in a new way in this kind of moment that we're in. And so so I've got my own experience of it, which is I kind of lean too hard into like, I've got it, I'll just go out on my own. And then I found myself really needing to reach out and do that vulnerable thing and say, I need people.
Yeah. And watch for more. Bethany and I are going to work on writing a point counterpoint article on introvert and extrovert as nobody is ever surprised to find out that I am an off the chart extrovert. So, but there's a breaking point on that as well. Well, thank you all. I could just sit here and read the chat. I feel like at this point, I almost wish I could just turn the mics off of everybody, but I feel like 58 people trying to all say something might be a little difficult. So we're going to keep it going here, but to keep the chat rolling, I agree. I think that there's pride is a big thing that's getting in the way. If I'm sort of boiling the ocean in terms of some of these comments, in terms of needing to be superhuman, feeling really prideful, feeling like you have to have it all. I think somebody even said one of these, right, is sort of the cause for this is everything from isolation, right? We've gone from everybody being in, I mean, even just the physicality of the workforce, right? Where is the work getting done? Pre-2022 or pre-pandemic, there was a lot more work getting done in an office around your people than what we're seeing in today's world. I think isolation in and of itself is a thing. I love the idea of the celebration piece that you mentioned, Bethany, because I think who do you high five when you're in your home office, right? You're just gonna Mel Robbins it and sit in front of the mirror and give yourself a high five because you need to do it. You need to feel proud of yourself. You need that moment where you can actually have somebody pat you on the back when you're doing good things, and that isolation is a fair statement. I think I saw in the chat too, somebody mentioned imposter syndrome. That's a scary, I mean, there are books and articles, there's a lot of information on the concept of imposter syndrome. I will admittedly say, I think I notice my own imposter syndrome in a lot of spaces where you recognize you are either in a role or in a room with people who expect you to know something or expect you to say something that you are the foremost authority on and that you are not. I start these stupid chats and I think that I'm supposed to be some know-it-all, and really I'm just here to listen to Bethany and you guys all tell me let me leave a little bit smarter and a little bit more aware. And then the last one that I called out was just the concept of decision making. There's a piece in terms of leadership to be in a place where at some point you have to be decisive, and that decision making piece of it can be isolating in its own way, and it can feel lonely in its own direction as well when you don't know who to lean to make sure that you aren't making that decision by yourself. Bethany, let's go back to your story, because I think that is a part of it when you think of the cause and your relationship too, in terms of where you headed, in terms of building that allyship, and then thinking about kind of when you had those moments where you recognized for you that you were feeling lonely, and when you recognized potentially a need for either change or speak up, or kind of what was that breaking point for you?
Yeah, thank you. Man, so many. I think that, you talked about the celebrating the wins was definitely something that, for a lot of you, I see a lot of people are in HR. HR is really interesting, right? Where when things are going well, nobody's talking to you. It's silent, right? Because everything's humming, everything's good. Usually you get a phone call when things are not going well, right? And so I kind of like looked for those days where I wasn't getting a lot of emails from our team members, where we were all just doing our thing, we were rolling and everything was smooth. We usually get the calls when there's an issue. And so there was the, like, when there was a win, everything's just kind of quiet, like it went well, right? Like there's feedback where people like, I would do it. Like someone mentioned earlier in the chat, leading change in itself can be really isolating because you're at the front. You're not kind of with the masses. You're carving a new path. You're implementing change. So when people were like, oh, that makes sense. That sounds good. Looking forward to that change. What I know is that's a huge win, but nobody's celebrating with you. They're like, good job. That's, see you later. And it gets quiet. And I had to figure out, where are my people to go celebrate that quiet moment, of like, it's just working. It's just working well. And no one's going to throw me a party. So how do I go celebrate those wins? And who are my people to do that with? So definitely my team. But for a lot of you who are individual people doing this on your own, find your people to go celebrate that. The other side of that coin is, who are you venting to? That's more dicey, right? Where a lot of our partners and friends have become our coaches. I actually talk to a lot of clients when we're new in our coaching engagement, they'll say, yeah, my spouse won't talk to me about work anymore, so now I have to find a coach, right? So a lot of us did this, especially during the pandemic, where we got really intimately connected to our partners and friends' working lives in new ways, because everyone's trying to figure out, where's my sounding board? How do I think about this next thing? And so this is where I have a coach and a therapist, because they play different roles in my professional life. I also find my tribe, my people, where I can go, I just got to vent about this thing. You don't know this person. You don't know anything about this, but can you just listen and just let me vent? And it's finding that place where you can be really vulnerable and be honest. Like, I don't know what to do next. Can you please listen to me? And then maybe be a thought partner. I have so many amazing friends that help me through that. My coach is incredible. And that creates space when it does get lonely, because it still does, right? When it gets lonely, I've got my people that I know to go to. And there's a lot of themes I'm seeing in the chat around allowing yourself to kind of go, it's okay to admit that I don't know. It's okay to admit that I need somebody else. I need their brain. I need their perspective. I need their feedback. It does take some humility to go, I don't have all the answers here, and I need somebody to talk to. And I think the cause can be feeling like that's not okay, right? The cause of that loneliness is it can be ego. And I don't mean that in a bad way. We all have an ego. Our ego is there to try to protect us, but that gets in the way. Imposter syndrome is kind of the way the ego shows up, and it goes, I'm supposed to be perfect. I'm supposed to be this one way that everybody else is. Nobody has all the answers.
Nope.
Nobody. And we get to be at a front row seat as coaches, knowing that everyone needs a partner. Everyone needs to kind of take that journey of going, I need support.
Okay, so I'm just going to admittedly tell everybody what I just did. So as she was talking, I wrote down a reminder for me of somebody that I need in my tribe. Like so if you need a to-do list coming out of today's session, make a little post-it note, write something on your page of paper. If there's somebody that you need to get time with on their calendar, that you need to reinstate to your tribe. My guess is you all have people that are in your tribe in one way, shape, or form. But I as you're writing this, I was like, oh crap, I have to make sure I get that follow-up meeting scheduled, because I'm gonna need that in a month. I'm gonna need that outlet in a month. So I just took this as a to-do list as we were talking here as well. All right, so we've got an idea of the cause. We obviously know there's a problem. I want to ask you guys, as we think about getting closer to the solve, kind of what's the way do we solve this particular problem in our own right? And so whether it is finding your tribe, what helps you when you do feel lonely, or when you call out you recognize your own loneliness? What are your solves? What are your ways that you're overcoming or understanding? I, in particular, have a girlfriend who and we're not in the same, we're both in a business development sort of role, but we don't compete with each other. But she is, we've officially deemed each other our hype people. So on mornings where I know I'm going to need a hype person, or she knows she needs a hype person, she's my hype person. So in my concept of having somebody in my own everyday life that I understands enough of being in a business development role, being a part of small business, understanding that piece of it. That's my quick tip on what I do to overcome loneliness on a day-to-day is a quick call to my girl Abby, and she's my hype person. Bethany, do you have a quick tip? And then we'll get into more of the grand solves.
Yeah, I would say that I've mentioned this a couple times, but I'm just going to put a finer point on it. I think that the biggest barrier to me kind of overcoming and going on my journey of being less lonely in my working life and personal life was vulnerability. Like just admitting that I can't do it alone, and that I don't have all the answers, and that's hard to do. It's hard to say I need people, especially when we've got kind of, especially in the Western world, we've got everything can be delivered to us, and we can go on LinkedIn and watch a bunch of videos, and we can kind of, get the answers we need, but we need each other. There's a lot of people who've done research on the fact that we evolved to be in community. That's part of our evolution as human beings, is we actually needed each other. We relied on each other as we were evolving as human beings. And we still need that. We still need people in our lives. And to get over the barrier of admitting it to yourself and say, oh, shoot, I need people. I actually didn't know that. This is the article that I wrote for Forbes and that Erin and I are going to unpack in a different article. Is I moved to Kenya during the pandemic because I was like, this is great. I'm going to work remotely. I don't need people. I don't need to see anybody. I'm going to go do this thing. And just one day I woke up and I was like, I hit the end of my introversion and I need people. And I literally have a Marco Polo that I sent to my friend Katie. And I was like, did you know you can hit the end of your introversion? I had no idea. So she's an introvert. She was like, it's not possible. And then she was like, no, it is possible. So I'm on this journey of admitting what I need. And being vulnerable with myself first, and then opening that conversation with trusted people that I know I can be vulnerable with. And that's been a great life lesson.
Well, I'm glad that that's the case. And I mean, it goes without saying, right, that the idea of if you're alone, you find people, right? It feels like it's like a basic equation, but there's more way. There's other ways to sort of skin this cat. There's other ways to approach the concept of loneliness. So there's an article we're going to talk about this Forbes article, and then we'll talk about that if you want me to talk about your Forbes article too. But there was an article that just came out just this past June in Forbes called "The Modern Workplace: How the Modern Workplace Affects Loneliness." I'll make sure that you guys get this in the follow-up materials as well. But at the end of it, it breaks down, and I'm throwing this at you guys, so I want to get your reaction to the 5, and we'll call them tips that they have around the solutioning for how to, in the modern workplace, overcome loneliness. Because I don't think we don't always get to pick the people we work with. We don't always get to pick the work that we do. We don't always get to pick the decisions that we want to have to make. And we oftentimes don't get to pick the leaders that we work around. So there's a lot to the loneliness factor in this modern workplace, and nor are we in a place where anyone's going to tell everyone to go back to work ever again. So we've got a lot of things happen to following in this modern space. So 5 different tips that they called out, and I'm going to call them out, and I'm going to just sort of in the chat, if you guys want to, and Bethany, or react as you will. The 5 that they call out is 1, having purpose-driven work. And you and I read this one initially, and we're like, yeah, but not all work is purpose-driven work. Like, it's great, and that's awesome. So the question, I guess, is I would ask is, how do you turn work that maybe isn't in particularly known as purpose-driven work? You have to sort of weave it into feeling like purpose-driven work. You have to make it purpose-driven work. Step 2 was feeling engaged. Thank you, Forbes. But I would just say that the concept of feeling engaged is, I think there's a degree of that vulnerability element, is putting yourself out there, going to the thing you maybe don't need to go to make sure that you're meeting those new people, introducing yourself to somebody maybe you wouldn't have introduced yourself otherwise. I think that's a degree of engagement that's going to be required to accommodate a loneliness going forward. A sense of belonging. Bethany, what are your reactions to that one? I feel like I've spoken my truth a little already on the first 2.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, man, I'm just going to say these 5 things are almost in reverse order from my perspective. So Erin, do you mind if I drop down to the bottom and kind of riff? Yeah. So, we talked about this. Erin just talked about this. Increasing learning, like challenging yourself, allowing yourself to get a little uncomfortable, right? Putting yourself out there in new ways. I think that leads to the next one. Erin kind of hit on this just a second ago. Create opportunities to connect, right? And that can be uncomfortable. We're adults. We like our routines, or at least I certainly do. And this whole journey has forced me to get out of my routine, get out of my preferences, and go, no, you know what? I got to show up at that thing, that networking thing. Mickey Moore, who's on this call, she has been such a brilliant presence in my life because she shows up. She shows up at all the stuff. She's brought me with her so many times, and it has enriched my life. It's not my default. My default is, again, to be an introvert and kind of hunker down. So challenge yourself, create new spaces to do new things. Hi, Mickey, I see your chat. Create the opportunity to do new things, find new opportunities to connect that might be new or novel to you. I think that there's a lot to talk about around belonging, but we've talked a little bit about this, like find your safe people. Find the people where you can be raw and authentic. And by the way, that might not be everyone. Erin mentioned we don't get to pick the people we work with all the time. And so how do you find where you can really kind of let your guard down and just be a human being that's trying to do work in the world together? And I think that leads to the next two, right? Is if we feel like we can find those safe spaces for us to be really just ourselves and say the things, and there's going to be trust. And there's the people on this call where I can do that at the Bailey Group, and it does help me feel like I belong there. Then I can feel engaged. Then the work that is just work and hard work sometimes can become more purpose driven.
Leilani, you brought up a great one. Actually, Leilani, do you mind? I feel like I call on you a lot, but I'm going to make you turn yourself off mute and speak to your peer group relationship, because I think we're seeing this come out. We're seeing a lot more of these show up in a lot of different venues, right? Is the opportunity to be a part of something that feels like you're creating something outside of your business, but where you're creating a trusted core group where you have that set up. I know, again, internally we talk about it. Leilani, do you want to talk about how you found your peer group, or kind of how that peer group formed itself?
Yeah, happy to. Honestly, it was a little bit more organic. So as a solopreneur and consultant, I have the pleasure of working with fantastic leaders, and it became very quickly apparent, right, how lonely it can also be working by yourself as a leader who is, partnering with other leaders and other organizations. And I got to know a few other women who are also solopreneurs, and we just kind of organically said, gosh, can we meet like every few weeks just to have a group to talk through things or bounce off proposals or opportunities, or gosh, when we're having, a bad day. And it also just turned into a text thread that when we have wins, they're sent to the text thread and we all get to celebrate, along with whomever is having that win for the day. Or in the off chance someone's like, gosh, I'm spiraling and I can't get out of my own head, right? There's almost always one or two of us that can either respond via text or can say, hey, I'm available for a call if you need to talk through this.
That's
And
awesome.
so it's been much more organic with that group. More recently, in this year, I've also become a facilitator for a more formal group via Wired. And I facilitate a group of 6 women, and also just seeing how they're coming together. And I think a lot of what they were looking for was exactly that as well, a safe space to form deeper relationships and work through all of the things, right? Because we're not individual compartmentalized humans, and the pandemic made that really very, very clear. There's just such a strong intersection of work and personal and all the other elements of our humanity coming together. And so it's fun to be able to facilitate that and witness it in that space. And it became apparent that I really needed that myself as well when I wasn't in
That's so
corporate.
cool.
So I had to kind of organically create it.
Thank you, Leilani, for adding your voice.
Yeah.
Rob, do you mind? I want to ask you to go off mute just because I'm curious to know what was the catalyst to adding this to the bottom of your email. If you guys haven't read the chat, and please do, because Rob, you can tell him, but I love this, and I'm curious to know what the catalyst was to getting this to be something you decided to add.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. And by the way, Erin, this is the first time I've joined. I just enjoying the conversation and listening today.
Sorry to call you out on the first one. This is a little
no, that's okay.
amazing in my own version.
I'm a pretty extroverted individual as well. So anyway, I actually, when I first launched out and hung my shingle out as a consultant, I was kind of mentored by a guy who had worked at NASA during the Kennedy Space Administration, and he talked about engagement there, and it was so exciting to me. And he had this idea that, it was about working with people that you trust, that you had to enjoy the work, and that the work had to matter at least somewhat to you. And so anyway, I took all of that and put it into this slogan, and just have kind of let it inform me. And it is so true. If you can get those 3 things, that's the trifecta of engagement within a workforce. So,
well, thank you. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, I love the idea that you've just sort of embedded it into something that people can come to expect. I hope it doesn't go overlooked. I hope every so often you you get a person that just says, I like your quote at the end of the email.
I do get it sometimes, and I'm a business coach, so I work the top leaders mostly, and I do think it's helpful for them to hear it, because sometimes I think they're thinking about not all the right things, some of the right things, but not all the right things. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for adding your voice, Rob. Thank you for hopping off mute and sharing that story. That's awesome. I as you're saying that, I'm now reconsidering my other next maybe mini to-do list here is my when I went through my master's program in org leadership, which now is 10 plus years ago, they made us come up with a mantra, and my mantra was be honest, make connections, create dialogue. And I think that there's a piece to what yours is and what mine is that I think I can a reminder that maybe I need to look at that mantra a couple more times more than I do, at least in any way, shape, or form. Bethany, anything else you want to add to this solving piece of it?
Oh, it's fantastic. No, Rob, that's so well said and so well written. I'm so grateful that you put that in the chat and spoke about it. Thank you. And then Vicki, I just want to shout out to you. Vicki kind of touches on that last piece of what you wrote, Rob, which is to accomplish something that matters, and what matters to someone might be really different from another person, right? So it's so important to know yourself, know what purpose-driven feels like to you. Where is your purpose? It's going to be really different for different people, and finding what matters to you, and then leaning into that in the rest of the trifecta that Rob talked about. But to know what that is, that can be a long journey sometimes, or even surprising for ourselves. So yeah, really great insights. Love awesome. the conversation.
Well, as many of you know, at least for those of you that follow me at all on any element of LinkedIn, I kick my week off with a quote. So when Bethany and I were talking about the topic for today, she was like, have you seen this quote? And I hadn't. So I'm going to allow Bethany to sort of tell the story of how she found the quote and talk about how it hit her, because I think that it's a great way to sort of close out and round out the discussion for this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. I didn't even tell you, this was literally just on my screen when you and I met to prep. It was like, it was just there. Yeah, so it was like I had LinkedIn open, and Brene Brown is actually the one who posted this quote. And so I was staring at that before we met. And then when we were having our conversation, it was like, well, here's the quote we want to talk about. The reason this resonated for me, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts, Erin, and anyone in the chat as well. The thing I loved about this is sometimes, I'm sure that you all have heard this idea of, soft skills when it comes to different parts of being a leader. And what I love about this quote, and I'll just read it, you don't have to choose between being wholehearted, loving, kind, and soulful, or winning. You can do both, but the bridge you must cross is vulnerability. And it just wraps everything up that we've been talking about today. We want our clients to be successful. We are working together to accomplish something in the world, something that's important for our own definition, or something that the world needs, oftentimes both. So when it comes to being successful, and in this term, the way that Pippa Grange talked about it is, to win, to be successful, you don't have to abandon being a human. In fact, you can do both, and the bridge is vulnerability.
Wow. And as a sport mom, I like the fact that this comes from a sports psychologist. When we talk about her probably immediate thought of this was the concept of winning in a sport situation. And I love the opportunity to sort of look at it through the lens and in a workplace as well. Because I think winning doesn't have to mean winning has in its own right has its own a level of definition, personalization. And so what winning can look like, I like the way that you transitioned it to what success is. The idea of really thinking about, we all get an opportunity we can be successful in our own right. And it doesn't mean we have to, I want to go back to the loneliness. It doesn't mean we have to hold it all in. We are in a position to say we don't have to own, we get to be in a place where we can own our loneliness, speak to our loneliness, find our people, to Leilani's point, find our group of people, to feel like we found those people, whether they're in the office or external side of the office, to be able to have those shared experiences with, so that you are able to both celebrate those wins, commiserate the losses, and be successful on both right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Bethany. Thank you all for participating. I want to do a quick close of house as we end today's session. I'm going to, I'm actually going to send this 2 ways, because if I've recognized, if I send a survey in a big long chunk of other links, this one gets lost. What I want to be able to get from you guys is it's going to be a quick pulse survey. Literally, it's just 2 questions. Coming out of last month's event, I talked about compliance, and we leaned pretty heavily into the Minnesota space. Obviously, that's where my physicality is. But I want to just get a gauge from the room, knowing that from us, especially as we're thinking about all of the changes happening in the workplace from a regulatory component. I want to just get a gauge on those people who've been attending as to where do you have your workers. So if you wouldn't mind just completing a quick pulse survey for me so that I get a gauge of what my audience is, this would be super helpful for me to make sure as I'm continuously building out the content for future months. So I'll send out a pulse survey as one email, and then you'll get the follow-up email with all the content in a second email as well. Then as a last note, as you guys are also making notes and marking calendars, Lakeside Chat September is on September 24th. It is my anniversary, so I will not forget that day, again at 9 a.m., so Tuesday the 24th. And we are going to talk on the next one, we're going to talk about the recognition that we are going to be slowly and quickly entering Q4, and where many organizations then at that point start to revisit their talent solutions and think about whether or not they are in a place where they need to put on a hiring freeze or not. You do a hiring freeze, or and we're going to talk about that as a topic going in as a preparatory for many of you that are thinking about how do you transition into Q4 and from a budgetary component. So hope that many of you can come back and join us. And then also on that pulse survey, and or just shoot me an email, send me a text, call me on the phone, whatever you want. If there's topics you'd like to see that you think are also important topics for us to be covering, I'd love to hear your feedback. So let me know. My goal of this is always to make these about you guys and to, like I said on the front end, to be in a place where we are creating conversation, where conversations need to be had. So please let me know if there's other topics you'd like to be talking about as well. Bethany, any closing words on your behalf? Thank you so much. I could talk to you all day.
Likewise. No, thank you for having me, Erin. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for the chat, the insights, the tips, the reflections. It's really rich. So I feel so grateful for this time. Thank you.
And Marie, there are articles there. Marie, I might steal your book recommendation and put that in the email follow-up as well. So thank you guys for that as well. But thank you again from Lakeside HR Group. It's been great to have you, and I will hopefully see you on a future Lakeside Chat. Bethany, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys. Have a great rest of your week.